Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, dead slaves, sirs, peasants, vassals, meat sacks, minions, voters. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. Let's go back to the United States, and this is going to be the final in this series I've done. I think this is 5 parts about the American election cycle and just some interesting facts about it, and putting my thoughts out there, whatever my 2 cents is worth. And this one is just about the American election system in general. And again, it's going to be kind of lengthy because I want to read some whole quotes from a few articles that can express how I feel about the American election system much better than I can. But the basic premise, of course, is that the American election system is completely compromised and has been for a while. So even though most people feel you need to be responsible and go out and vote, and I certainly have that same bug, might as well, even though I know the entire system is rigged, and it still seems like everybody should go out there and vote. And of course, if everybody did go out and vote, or if the government ever did really come around and make it easy for every single American to vote and have it count, that would be a great thing. But we're dealing with the election system we have. So let me go over generally like a lot of the methodology that's used to make sure that votes don't really count. And we're seeing a lot of that, certainly in this election. Already we've seen irregularities in the elections all over the country in the caucuses and the primaries from using online voting that is easily hacked to a judge in Ohio granting 17-year-olds, 7-year-olds, the 17-year-olds the right to vote just because their birthday would fall when the election happened. And then we saw all sorts of other disenfranchisements too, polling places being shut down in different areas of different states in order to make sure people couldn't vote, or the double check ballot for Trump. I believe once again that might have been Ohio, where you had to check 2 places in order to vote for Trump in order for it to count, which is relatively unprecedented. And then of course the history we have evidence that suggests Obama's elections were both manufactured. There's evidence that suggests that Bush's both elections were manufactured. And we've seen evidence of that before. And certainly we've seen evidence that in lots of states, particularly in all the contested elections in all the different states during those Bush and Obama elections. But then we also have the fact that the elites have set up a system in order to filter out the popular vote. And we've seen that very controversial in this election cycle, because now everyone is aware of these so-called super delegates. And so we have these super delegate system where they essentially are a bunch of status quo representatives who want to make sure that they filter out any grassroots movements and can vote the way they want. And so Trump may actually not end up with the nomination just because of these systems and filters they have set up. And also we have the electoral college system, which works in the same way. And then we have redistricting. We have all these insane, amazing conundrums called districts. All one has to do is look at some maps, and I have some of this attached below. Look at maps of how redistricting is done by both parties all the time in order to increase the way they can manipulate elections. The number of polling places, we've seen that as a variable. The long lines and the inavailability of convenient polling places has disenfranchised lots of citizens across the country. Complex ballots, we've seen lost mail votes. Certainly we've had problems with military votes being counted from overseas military people. And then of course just total disenfranchisement, alienating enough people that there really can't be any movement in the elections, and they're won by margins a lot of times because just so many people are left out and just don't even bother voting anymore. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we have obvious fraud and hacking involved in online voting, and then before that the voting machines, which is proven to be hacked, and we saw the results of that because the numbers just don't add up in elections anymore. And then the concept of the wasted vote is used in elections all the time, where everybody has to line up for either one of the status quo candidates, and And that's exactly why the system's set up that way. So you have to choose between the two people who are going to maintain the system so that all the corporate and government crime can continue. They want to continue their cartels and the status quo, and therefore anybody else that comes along is a wasted vote, not to mention the fact that they would change the cash cow for everybody that's part of that system. And then so we even had a Republican National Committee member come out and say that political parties choose their nominee, not the general public. That's said on the news, and it should, that kind of story should travel like wildfire across this country, but it's relegated to the people who are watching and paying attention in the alternative media. And then one of the other problems with the elections, of course, too, are that it all involves lawyers and career politicians, and we don't really get any genuine citizen politicians. Bernie Sanders might qualify as one, and people like Ron Paul certainly qualify, but those kind of people are easy to marginalize, just as Ross Perot is easy to marginalize and Ralph Nader was easy to marginalize. And one of the other problems, of course, with the election system is just the media. Corporate media is part of the machinery. They're part of the partisan election machinery, and so the fact that they're disseminating so much distortions, and they're siding with their status quo candidates and the status quo politics and business as usual because they're part of it. And so once again, they're more than happy to feature the antics of people like Trump or whoever, Bernie Sanders or Perot, and amplify it and sensationalize it in order to get more ratings, and it's working really great right now. So so we have all these fatal flaws with just the election system itself that is totally corrupted and has little to do with either being a republic or a democracy. And then I have to painfully bring up the fact that let's remember that one of the other fatal flaws of the election system is the electorate itself. Just one example, 41% of Americans don't know we have 3 branches of government, 62% of Americans couldn't name them, and 33% couldn't even name one branch of government. And all anyone has to do is watch any Mark Dice videos, and I certainly don't recommend necessarily watching any Mark Dice videos because he's a snake oil peddler. But Mark Dice videos show the stupidity of the American electorate when you ask them about any issues. Recent one featured Mark Dice asking if people thought Richard Nixon could win against Hillary Clinton, and most of them had never even heard of Richard Nixon, and not only presumed that he was actually running, but would pontificate about it as if they knew something about it. So the American public certainly has been dumbed down, but I don't want to judge them too harshly sometimes because all the media and all the propaganda and all the manipulation, they're saturated with their entire lives, and they're saturated from all directions. In the same way they get all kinds of propaganda from all sorts of different sources. But this whole election system and knowledge of the government is purposely dumbed down and encouraged in United States society, unfortunately, and therefore we do not have an informed electorate, and all the more reason that all this simplistic sloganeering and imagery and propaganda techniques that we see in the media and that the politicians use are so effective. And the fact is, this country is ill-informed, and unfortunately, a lot of citizens know as little about their opponents' policies as well as the policies of candidates they support. But anyway, let me go on a little bit about with some quotes about the election system in the United States that, like I say, explain things a lot better than I could. And so I'm going to read some of these things word for word. And one of them is an article by Perry that says new boss will be same as the old boss. He says, quote, politics today is not about Republicans, Democrats, nor is it about health care, abortion, taxes, education, or any of the buzzwords that we have become campaign slogans for individuals who have mastered the art of telling Americans exactly what they want to hear. Politics today is about one thing and one thing only: maintaining the status quo between the controllers who are the politicians, bureaucrats, and the corporate elite, and the controlled. That's you, the taxpayers. Hillary will not save the nation, neither will Trump or Sanders, unquote. And I have to completely agree with that. And so the people that come after me for supporting Trump, trust me, I have no illusions. I have no more illusions about Trump or Sanders or any of the other candidates. My feeling is anybody that runs for that office has a lot of problems, and is not ultimately not to be trusted. And even if they manage to get an insider, the insider will become or get an outsider, the outsider will become an insider. And so anyway, let me go on a little bit more. We have Hunter S. Thompson with a wonderful quote, "The main problem in any democracy is that the crowd pleasers are generally brainless swine who can go out on a stage and whoop up the supporters into an orgiastic frenzy, and then go back to the office and sell every one of those poor bastards down the tube for a nickel," unquote. That's how I really feel about these elections. That's how I really feel about these candidates. You have the U.S. is run by two corrupt establishments: Democrats who want the government to be involved in everything, and then Republicans who say they don't want the government involved in everything, except that they want the government involved in everything. Both are for crony capitalism, both are protecting banks, both are for perpetual war, and both own their own medias. And so that's why we get this two-trick pony. Now we see the whole neocon crowd going for Hillary Clinton. So that should show you something too. Your party allegiance only means so much, and it's easy to switch around when the policies do not differ that much. So then I'll go on to Chris Hedges, who is always very articulate, and he wrote an article that politicians are little more than brands, something I've said quite often and have used recently. And he says that, quote, "The carnival of the presidential election is a public display of the deep morbidity and artifice that have gripped American society. Political discourse has been reduced by design to trite, patriotic, and religious cliches, sentimentality, sanctimonious paeans to the American character, a sacralization of militarism, and an acerbic adolescent taunts. Reality has been left behind. It is an example of the deep cynicism among elites who, like all other con artists, privately mock us for our gullibility and naivete," unquote. So well done. As he goes on in the article to talk about the fact that they sell skillfully manufactured personalities, and that's why they're brands. And that's why I understand when I look at these candidates, whether it's Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or even Ronald Reagan, these are politicians who are brands. They are skillfully manufactured personalities, and anyone could admit to that. Just because they get fooled by the one that they agree with the most doesn't mean they aren't brands and skillfully manufactured personalities. And Trump is certainly one of those, and probably more so than most. He has created a superior mythology, but it is still a skillfully manufactured personality, and he of all people is aware of it. But one difference is he'll come out and admit it, and the rest of them act like their behavior is a normal thing. So and then let's go on to Sheldon Wolin, a wonderful cultural analyst and observer and writer who talked about the idea of inverted totalitarianism, which is what he would put forth that we have in the United States right now. And he wrote that, quote, "One cannot point to any national institutions that can accurately be described as democratic in the United States. Surely not the highly managed, money-saturated elections, the lobby-infested Congress, the imperial presidency, the class-based judicial and penal system, and least of all the media," unquote. And I agree with that. The corporations control all three branches of government. The corporations write our laws. The corporations determine the media and public debate. The corporations have turned public education into indoctrination. The corporations are the ones who profit from permanent war. The corporations are the ones that suppress wages. The corporations are the ones that want poor health care. And on top of all that, corporations want a tax boycott, so they don't have to pay for any of this. And so the corporations that run this country created the electorate they want, dumbed down and ill-informed. They have created the media they want to keep the system set up that way, and they've created this unending parade of puppets that continue to maintain the system for everyone. And another article that came out is Party Loyalty in an Election Year Gone Mad, written by Andrew Levine. And he says that, quote, loyalty to political parties that stand for something or that stood for something once upon a time, something worth caring about, would be understandable. But Democrats and Republicans stand for nothing except for getting in each other's way. If they ever stood for anything loftier than that, no one still living remembers, and both parties serve corporate interests, not their constituents, unquote. And boy, well put, Mr. Levine. And that's part of the quotient too. The two-party system, the fake two-party system, that basically have all the same policies on all the big things, the trade agreements, perpetual war, the military-industrial complex, bailing out the banks, corporate welfare. They're all for all that. And they keep everybody divided with these social engineering issues like abortion and religious issues, and keep people distracted from the fact that they're actually getting all the big things that they want. The rest of the stuff, it just becomes a battleground for most of my lifetime, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of these same battles over these social engineering issues that never get solved but only continue to divide Americans, and worse all the time. As I've often said, my quote about this is, Republicans and Republicrats are two cheeks on the same ass, and they both stink. And they use this fake two-party system, as I mentioned earlier, as a dynamic. And so any people that try to challenge the status quo are weeded out as fringe. Let's remember that Trump and Sanders were both considered fringe candidates who didn't stand a chance when this election started. But things are changing. So anyway, there we have a little overview of just how I feel about the election system in general. And for me, and particularly in this election, I don't really care whether it's Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. And I have no illusions about either one of those candidates, and I'm certainly not on board with all the policies or personality styles of either of those candidates. But the fact is, I want somebody who's going to go in there and fuck shit up. And maybe one of these guys will do it. Of course, I could be kidding myself about that too. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.